Welcome back to the home front. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Today, I'm joined by Jennifer Adams, the Democratic nominee for Congress in Florida's 7th Congressional District. Jennifer is a Florida native. She has more than 15 years of experience in community engagement, legislative policymaking, and conflict resolution, with a forward-thinking approach that emphasizes partnerships and collaboration to identify successful solutions to complex problems. She is a native, a sports fan, and it said here in your bio, Jennifer, you actually played sports in college. What sport did you play, or sports did you play in college?
So I was a football, or as we call it here in America, soccer.
Okay. Here in America, we call it soccer. That's right.
That's perfect.
Um, all right. So, almost anything in American political life is easier than actually putting your name on the ballot. And looking through your bio and your background, it looks like you've had quite a successful career, both as a parent of three kids, getting them, as you said, I think it was mom's mobile logistics, which I thought was great. And, in your local community, serving as a mediator and all those other things. So, what was it that, as you sat there looking around, made the decision that, what, now I have to put my name on the ballot. I actually have to throw my hat in the ring because, as you know, that is not an easy thing to do in American politics, especially in Florida, is not what you would call the easiest of places to compete.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you and all the work that you're doing. So I stepped up to run because it's my hometown, it's where I grew up, where I live, and we lacked representation that was representative of our shared community values, that was getting things done, that was somebody and something that was reflective of the kind of leadership that we need today. I'm a survivor of domestic violence, which unfortunately is something that's not uncommon in our world, in our country. And when the system didn't work to protect my kids and myself, meaning the courts and the things that I had learned about in school growing up, like they were supposed to. And you mentioned I played, sports. I'm a big believer in you got the rule of law. You've got, different rules that when you play a game that people should have to stand by and hold each other accountable. Like, when those refs pull out those flags, if they don't, people get really ticked off, right? If you're watching a
Mhm.
football game or so just not seeing things done, not seeing things for people to come together, not being good examples for my kids as to what a leader should be and what a leader looks like. And so having been able to overcome the court system and eventually, work to then help others because I knew if it was happening to me, it was happening to other people and was able to help write and get past bipartisan legislation last year in Florida. So it's possible to get things done. You know, I'm not going to complain about something and not do something about it. And so I'm not in the political world, was never into politics, but I do believe in fairness. I do believe in the American dream, and I do believe in opportunity for everyone. And so here I am talking with you.
Um, so here we are now, as folks are listening to this, we're just, it's hard to believe, a couple of weeks away from Election Day. Monday, October 21st, I think, is the first day of early voting. Is that right in Florida?
In Florida,
Uh,
correct.
yeah. And so, what have you seen? What have you learned from, your fellow Floridians? I know you're in Seminole County today. What have you learned going around the district? Because, as the listeners know, Jennifer, I've spent a lot of time on the road this fall, going to very different, very diverse neighborhoods, and I'm always glad and heartened that I did. Sometimes I'm heartbroken that I
Mm.
did. But what have you learned, both about Florida, about the district, and in what it means to run? And I think being a leader is really the important piece here because I think so many people that run, it's a stepping stone. Oh, I've done this, I've done that. Now I'll do this, or oh, I'll go run for, I'll be a congressperson for 6 years, and then I'll go be a lobbyist. Like, what is being out on the trail taught you so far?
Yeah, great question. So I'm always one that I like to ask a lot of questions. And I like to hear what, people think. And so we've knocked on thousands of people's doors here in the district. And the conversations are, people are tired of the fighting. They're
Mm-hmm.
tired of the pettiness. They are tired of people that are dysfunctional and for serving themselves. And so they also don't like people who are, trying to purport to be something that they're not. We all have more in common than we don't, right? I mean, economics are really important, right? Lowering the cost of living. We've got issues here in Florida with, clean water, with, making sure that our environment is sustainable, healthcare insurance and all those things. But at the end of the day, people also just want and love to feel like they're appreciated, to feel like what they have to say matters,
Mhm.
to feel like, their sense in having a voice doesn't mean they necessarily want to tell people what to do, but they want people to listen to their experiences, because we all have different ones, right? And so everybody's coming at things from different points of view, and that's okay. It doesn't mean we all have to agree on everything.
Right.
But I do think having respect and civility for somebody else is really important. And in today's age, right, that we don't all get the same information. Like we're not all reading the same newspapers, right? We're not all, a lot of us aren't even reading newspapers, right? It's all, social media and the national perspective of news, but not really about hometown. So we've come at it to where we're talking about things that we can all agree on and starting from there rather than starting at things we know that there's going to be a disagreement about, because that's never really going to be a positive conversation.
Right. And as a mediator, you probably know that as well as anybody. If you sat down in a mediation and you looked across the table and you go, "You're an idiot," my
Yeah,
guess is that they're probably not, it's not going to be a good day. So
that's
let's
going to be a
talk.
short mediation.
It's
Yeah.
going to be a short mediation, right?
Mhm.
So let's talk about Florida in particular. Obviously, you've had two hurricanes back to back here just in the past couple of weeks. As you noted, because of those hurricanes and because of whether or not it's sea level rise or whatever it is, very difficult to get homeowners insurance now in a lot of
Mhm.
places in Florida. You mentioned clean drinking water, and so what is it that is facing the everyday lives of Floridians that you're hoping to help out with? Because I think that's the other part too, is going back to when my dad worked for Newt Gingrich in 1995, right? Newt sort of brought in the national campaign to congressional races, right? It's all about national issues. It's all about national issues. It's all about these ideological issues, which very much left individual Floridians, let's say in Florida 7th, in the background, because now whatever it is they might worry about, whatever it is they're dealing with on a daily basis, takes a back seat to whatever fight somebody in Washington, D.C. wants to have. So how do you see those issues affecting the people in the 7th district?
Yeah, I think, when they say, all politics is local, I do think that applies to congressional as well, right? Because they are supposed to be representing their district. It's just in up in DC, right? So
Mm-hmm.
definitely having Florida kind of having been the testing ground for Project 2025,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we've seen that does not work out well. Because when you don't have diverse perspectives coming in, right? We've had a supermajority with the GOP here, and so
Right.
they wouldn't have conversations. They didn't want to hear. They didn't want feedback. They didn't want input really from the people or from even the other side of the political aisle. So as a result, we have to where our infrastructure has been neglected.
Mm-hmm.
Dollars have come in, but a lot of places they haven't been spent, right? So people are really frustrated because they haven't, you know, been able to see the results of that, right? It takes time, obviously, when the way policy works, but we've got issues with, raw sewage not being treated in certain places because those local governments haven't been held accountable. If you're a Republican, they don't want to get rid of bad eggs, even if it's a detriment to the community. And so, putting people above party, right, is super important, and is how I view leaders, how I view what the government is supposed to do, is to help people, not be against them.
Yeah.
So issues with the environment, but updating the infrastructure is really important, and also being held accountable, and not to the people, not to the special interest groups, right, that are basically bankrupting a lot of homeowners, because all of a sudden you're seeing like 1,000% increases in homeowners insurance for no reason. And now
Right.
the state of Florida is the largest insurance company basically, because all of the insurance companies have left, and that's a result of bad policy.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that. I know that there's somebody smarter than me in history who said this first, Jennifer, but I really do believe, for the example of homeowners insurance in Florida, that if you try and avoid your worst outcome, you always find your way to it. And I feel like Florida, in particular, with a guy like DeSantis, who's just such a, he just gets up there and blusters, and as you said, they've had a super majority for so long, that now the one thing that he probably never wanted, right, is somebody who is that he's in that sort of drown government in a bathtub kind of person, is now he's got to be responsible for it. Or you see that with FEMA relief and rebuilding the Stafford Act funding, that everybody's voting against it, but then they need it, because again, you don't want to be the member of Congress, except of course the person you're running against, this guy Corey Mills, who we can talk about, who wasn't there for their people. I mean, DeSantis even had to grudgingly say, yeah, like Joe Biden's given us what we've needed, but he didn't want to admit it, right? And that's one of those things where I think the unreality of the Republican Party that I grew up in, right, is coming into contact with real life in a place like Florida, which is, I think it was a couple of years ago when I think the legislature had to appropriate funds to strengthen or raise the seawall in Miami, but they wouldn't call it because of sea rise, right? They said it was economic development or something, right? So like even they understand that when Mother Nature intervenes, like Mother Nature's not a Republican, Mother Nature's not a Democrat. She's going to do what she's going to do. But as you said, and I think the coastal areas of Florida in particular, this hits people really hard, and if you can't afford to insure your house, right, then everything downstream from there becomes really difficult too. And then, as you said, Florida is the state. It's now the insurer of last result. And it's all because over the course of 10, 15, 20 years, people refuse to accept, regardless, I'll say this even, Jennifer, regardless of the input that's causing the output, whether or not it's global warming or whatever it is, to accept the reality of what we're dealing with and saying, how are we going to deal with that, as opposed to saying, well, I don't think global warming is real, so please ignore the 2 hurricanes that have just smashed into the state.
Right, right. Yeah, no, I like a politician or somebody who's in government. It should not be about how is this decision going to impact me as a politician, right? It should be, I'm here to serve the people, because we all know for the most part, like, okay, we need to do something with our stormwater, right? It's super outdated. It's, World War II, we're talking about in some places.
Right.
Some places still have wells in the state of Florida, and they passed a law last year that they have to be removed. Well, of course, no money was appropriated for that, right? And the majority of people who have wells are in rural areas and can't afford to do that. And so I think recognizing that there are mistakes that have been made, right? Taking ownership of those, not trying to make things be a Pollyanna, and that everything that every decision DeSantis makes is omniscient and and is all knowing is ridiculous, because everybody's human. However, I think to not be transparent, which is what's been going on in Florida, to try and make sunshine law become basically the dark ages and go away, it's really a disservice to people who could be of help, people that could take preventative measures, because that's always cheaper, we know, right, to be preventative rather than reactionary. And then to be able to spend the dollars that taxpayers have paid here to the federal government, bringing them back in the form of FEMA, disaster relief funds for small businesses, for farmers, is something that shouldn't be a point of contention from extremists, that are GOP members and who are just wanting to do it because they think that that's what their fan base wants to hear, but is really a detriment and has had disastrous results for the people in Florida's 7th Congressional District and elsewhere. And I'll say it's not just on the coastline either. In this district, we have the St. Johns River, right, which is one of 2 that flows from the south to the north, the other one being the Nile River, right, in
Oh,
the
interesting.
world.
I had no
And
idea.
so all of we still have rising that's going on right now in the middle of our state because that's the water's flowing that way as well. So it's not even like we're done with the aftermath of Milton here. No, it's still continuing to rise. And so um, I think people understanding and really taking action on the government side is super important to be able to understand that. And then also doing an assessment of like, okay, where are we at? How can we make this better? And the taxpayers' dollars should be going to these projects. We shouldn't be refusing them and then they're going elsewhere because people are paying them, whether they want to or not. But there's a definite need for those dollars. And so I think it's just complete neglect. I think it's just a dereliction of duty and to what these elected officials have sworn an oath to when they were, sworn into office to be about the people instead of themselves.
Yeah, I remember years ago, I was in Kansas, of all places, Jennifer, and I was talking to some folks who, in a very conservative district, had actually run as pretty progressive people. Um, and they had actually taken over, I think they had actually won, I think, two or three county council seats. I can't remember exactly where it was. But there was a debate over whether or not to take these federal funds that they were being offered to fix their water treatment plant. And, you know, most of the people in the county said, yes, let's fix the water treatment plant. But there was a very loud conservative minority that said, no, give the money back, send it to the border, rebuild the wall. Right. And so that's the other part too, is are you seeing in your campaign all of the nearly decades worth of MAGA stuff filtering into the information ecosystem in your district and in your race?
Yeah, there definitely is some of that for sure. I would say, in my campaign, I'm not running against Donald Trump, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
running against Corey Mills, who is, lock in step a lot of, with Trump. However, about having this be local, I'm from this area, right? They
Right.
know that I will talk to anybody if it will help everyone, kind of thing. And I'm about listening to people and not, disregarding suggestions or how things are impacting that, individual. But the social media and things like that, not people not really knowing what the truth is something that on both sides of the aisle is a problem, I think, right? I had a conversation with somebody the other day and they had a Trump sign in their yard and they also had a Jennifer Adams sign in their yard.
Right.
So I mean all of these, the pundits that are making these predictions about certain things and looking at certain data, when you look at the like the color commentary about things, it's so nuanced, right, that
Right.
it's really difficult to you can't put everybody into these boxes because different things appeal to different people. And I will say though that I when people say, oh, there's this and there's this, or if you're for pro choice, reproductive freedom, um I'm like, look, we're not going to agree on everything, and that's okay. That's what makes America so great,
And that's
is
what
that we don't
democracy
have
is.
to.
Right.
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so I think just being okay with saying, like, okay, you have your opinion. That's great. I'm fine with that. And then if you show respect, right, then usually you get it back. So I think those are definitely things that I've been seeing. And it blows some people's minds. Some people can't wrap their head around that because they
Right.
vote party line strictly. But the majority of people too in Florida have been trending to MPAs. It's
Right.
it's it's the biggest growing non-party in our state and it looks like across the country.
No, no. I mean, I think NPA has no party affiliation, and I think in California, where I lived for many years, no party preference is now the leading for new registrants. That's where they're going. I think even now, it's the Republican Party in California is now third behind NPP and the Democratic Party. But it's interesting you bring up the not putting people into boxes too, because as I understand it, the guy you're running against, Corey Mills, his primary opponent actually endorsed you. Is that right?
That's correct. That's
And so,
correct.
so
Yes.
tell us how that happens.
Yeah, well, I think authentic leadership and being real is definitely something that people underrate. I think people having some premise and a foundation about who somebody is is invaluable. And so having grown up here, it was funny, I mean, I had a high school soccer coach who, I reached out to early on and, was telling him I was running for Congress and, would really appreciate his support, doing my call time and going through people that I know. And he
Right.
said, well, I've got a good friend, and he has got, he can't stand Corey Mills. And so I said, oh, really? So I connected, I had conversations and, more conversations with more people. And, because when I was looking into Corey Mills, he, it's not, doesn't live in the state of Florida. He lives in, outside of DC in Northern Virginia. He first
Right.
registered to vote right before he filed to run for Congress. And, this is his first term. But honestly, it's the good old, old school way of just, telephone calling up people and having a
Yeah.
conversation and being willing to talk to people that you don't know what that conversation is going to be like.
Believe me, I mean, in 5 years, Jennifer, and you can appreciate this now, I have done more call time than I could ever have imagined. And when I first started, I was terrible at it because I was scared to death of rejection or whatever somebody was going to say.
Mhm.
And now, if I thought somebody would give me a kidney, I'd ask for it. Right. And so I think that's right. So Mills is a carpetbagger. And am I right in saying that he's sort of an acolyte of Eric Prince, the Blackwater guy? Is that right?
Yes, yes. So Mills, I mean, when I won the primary here,
Hmm.
I have had so many people in the like military and veterans, who and defense contractors who have reached out to me about Corey Mills, in terms of he's a charlatan, stolen valor,
Right.
that he doesn't live here, and the Republican Party knows that he doesn't.
Right.
And so, you know, when I started doing a little bit more research, he started up an arms company selling to international nations, foreign nations, that he won't disclose. And one of his business partners is a guy named Joseph Schmitz. Joseph Schmitz was a inspector general for the Department of Defense. And when he was getting investigated by Grassley, he resigned and became an executive with Blackwater.
Mm-hmm. So
So yeah,
Corey Mills is an arms dealer,
yeah,
basically, right?
basically, yep,
And
100%.
right, and quite the esteemed colleagues, I'm sure, around the world, because arms dealers tend to sell to whoever will buy their
Hmm.
AK-47 or whatever it is they're hawking. They don't care. They don't take sides, right? They'll sell a gun to anybody, and I think that's also, aside from not being, from the district, aside from being a carpetbagger, aside from this, he's also one of those guys who, he votes against FEMA and then he, tries to grandstand in another state, right? About
Yeah,
stuff that like, oh, you don't need the government's help. We can all do this together. But that's the whole point of government, of course, is doing the things together that we can't do individually. And I think that's one of the things that guys like Mills, right? They're just counting on the idea that everybody's angry and everybody's hateful towards somebody else. And without someone, who he can adequately bounce things off of, like if you were a progressive Democrat, right, it might be easier for him, but you're not, right? And we've seen this not only in places like Jacksonville, Florida, just up the road, but across the country, which is that a competent, confident Democrat has a really good chance against a MAGA goon like Corey Mills because individual voters say, oh, wait a second. Maybe, as you said, Jennifer, I don't agree with this person on everything, but at least they look like they want to go do the job, right? They pay attention to what I'm saying. And as I've
mhm,
seen too out on the road, is to your point, like when you go to those doors, you make those calls, so many folks have been, or at least they feel like they've been left behind. They feel
yeah,
like their voices don't matter. They feel like their opinions and what's troubling them don't matter. And that's not to say also that they want government to solve all their problems by any stretch. It just
right.
means that no one is listening to them, from the city council to the president of the United States. And so when someone actually shows up and says, I'm here to ask for your vote, but I'm also here to listen to what you have to say, people are like,
Mhm.
oh, okay, well, just spend a few minutes with me because I think that's, it's so much more uh, engaging for them other than having to like scream at the television because they feel like no one's listening.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's it's doing the work, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's putting in your sweat equity
Right.
and asking them for their vote and earning their vote, right?
Right.
It's not just, making assumptions, oh, everybody's going to vote party line and I'm an incumbent. And well, no, I mean, volunteers matter, grassroots matters, people that really are going to dedicate, time to it, which is not something that's really, it's not easy. We only have less than 7% moms with school age kids in Congress, right? Because, parents are juggling a lot, right? And it does take a lot of time to run for office if you're doing it the right way. And if you don't have dark money supporting you, like I don't. And so knocking on doors is super important. I will say too that when people just come around a few weeks before an election and people are not dumb.
Right.
People they recognize that and nobody likes being taken advantage of or to be looked at and viewed as though, oh, they're a sucker, right?
Right.
And so I think that's a big part of it too, because people they know that Corey Mills for the most part is a fraud, and even
Right.
on these little, these missions that he's doing, like what you were talking about, you know, he chose to run for Congress. That's the government, and then to be like, oh, the government, they are awful. Well, he's a part of the government,
Right.
right? So instead of, running for it and then blowing it up, how about like try to make it better?
Right. Well, that again, but that's the idea that, I mean, remember that politics is hard,
Yep.
governing is harder, right? Like
Hmm.
governing is not glamorous. It is,
Yep.
to your point, and I think this is one thing that, again, I've seen out on the road myself, and I'm sure you have even more, is this is really hard work, right?
Hmm.
It's day in and day out. It's on the doors, it's on the phones, it's talking to everybody in the district, whether they agree with you or not. To your point, which is like, most folks would prefer not to have to worry about this stuff. They would prefer to know that the person they've elected has their best interests at heart and is
Yep.
going to do the thing they need to do without being talked to every time about, hey, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And being, bothered, because part of representative democracy is the idea that somebody else, you send them to Tallahassee or you send them to Washington with your best interests. And I think that's one thing that we've really gotten away from.
Hmm.
And I think also, look, you live, the seventh, I believe, is probably mostly in the Orlando media market. So there's probably just wall to wall television commercials anyway. Most people have tuned them out. Most of them are terrible to begin with, as I've talked to the crowd listening before. And so, I really do believe that, as old fashioned as it sounds, is getting out on the doors, getting out in the field, getting out to the neighborhoods and the people that are going to participate really does matter, because your race is going to be close. And the margin is going to come down to how many of those people have you talked to individually. You, Jennifer, as the candidate, how many people
Hmm.
have they talked to who said, oh, yeah, Jennifer Adams stopped by my house. She was terrific. Right. And if Mills is just this ghost and this little homunculus who's, just doing it for his own purposes, people, like you said, voters are not stupid. And I think this is really important to understand, too, is that whether or not you live in a fancy neighborhood or whether or not you live in a tough neighborhood, I think for a lot of people like me, Jennifer, we, I think, too often assume that if somebody isn't economically well off, that they're uninformed. And that's what I've learned, or as I've been reminded
Hmm.
of this fall, is that is not at all true. Folks know exactly what's going on, and we don't give them enough credit for that.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I mean, there are definitely some voters that they're disengaged. They've got a good, they're working multiple jobs,
Right.
or, they're apathetic because they don't think, government, it's a lost cause or
Right.
whatever kind of thing. However, I will say I don't think the majority of people understand how much policy impacts their lives, right?
Sure.
Like from the time school starts in the morning, right? To, how much you pay in taxes. However, I think where there's a lot of misguidance is, like we talked, like I mentioned, putting people in boxes, right? I mean,
Mhm.
people who are one sex, they don't all vote the same way, right? People who are
Right.
of a certain age demographic, they don't all vote the same way, And so that's where I think really, like, having those conversations is super important. And it was interesting. I did this meet and greet a couple of weeks ago at somebody's house, and it was, in a neighborhood. People came over, and I gave my stump speech, and then I, was anybody have questions, love to, get your, feedback, or, what's keeping
Mhm.
you up at night. And it was crickets. And I said, wow, like nobody has any questions. That's shock. And they were like, oh, like you really want questions? And you really want feedback? And I was like,
Right.
yeah, yes, I actually. So it was like, you really are meaning what you say? And I was like, yeah, I really want to know. And then, I mean, then like an hour later, we're
Right.
still there talking with them. But yeah,
I know you have to get that one person to ask the question, right? And then the
yeah,
floodgates open. All right.
exactly.
Listen, we are 2 weeks just roughly to election day, Jennifer. Where can folks find more information about you and your campaign, and how can they get involved and how can they help?
Yeah, thanks. Well, if you can go to our website at jenniferadamsforcongress.com. You can donate on there. There's a donate link. You can also click on our Mobilize to volunteer, to submit feedback, to ask questions. And you can also follow on social media at Jennifer Adams for Florida. So Jennifer Adams, FORFL. Repost, follow us, like, give comments and feedback. But it really does take everybody working together. Campaigns, while they don't have to cost, millions of dollars by any means, you can be effective and efficient with dollars. It does take money to reach
Right.
voters, to send out mailers. So in the earlier people donate, but up until the very end too, we're still sending out mailers. We're still doing the work needed. We're still talking with people, and that all takes dollars. So if you go on there, it would be, great, really appreciated, so we can ensure that a victory for everybody and get back to really having leadership in this district and up in Congress that's working for the people, and not for themselves.
Well, amen to that. And also remember, guys, and let me zoom out back to the national level for a second. It is crucial that we make sure that Jennifer and other Democrats in swing districts win their races, guys, because not only does it matter for the majority in the U.S. House, it also matters, guys, for the certification of the 2024 election, because when Jennifer wins, she will be sworn in on January 3rd, 2025. And the certification will take place again when? January 6th, 2025. So it's not only making sure that Jennifer could do the work for the people in Florida's 7th, but also making sure that we have the numbers to defend democracy as we try and wrap up campaign 2024 and defend democracy. All right, Jennifer,
Yep.
thanks so
And
much. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, I just want to add to that. And my opponent is an election denier. He was
Right,
one of those that was right out at the stop this deal. So I can guarantee you he will not certify an
right,
election if Donald Trump's not the winner.
right. Absolutely. And we don't need more of that. All right,
Yeah.
Jennifer Adams, thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Everybody else, as always, you can find me here at the home front on Apple and Spotify. You can find me over at Substack, also the home front on Twitter and TikTok at Reed Galen, on Threads and Instagram at Reed_Galen USA. And always, guys, join the union.us. Go out there, get involved, help folks like Jennifer get elected this fall. And we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody.